So welcome everybody. My name is Lucy Hogg. I'm Head of Voluntary Sector Infrastructure at Voluntary Norfolk, and I'm really delighted to be chairing this session today on demonstrating your impact. So we're joined by two speakers today, Jenny Potkins from NCVO and Paul Webb, who's Head of Youth Work at MAP. I think it's really an interesting time for us to be doing a session like this, given the amount of change that's going on within the context of COVID. And I think probably there's never really been a better time to rethink a little bit about how we evidence the impact of the work we do and how we measure that impact. So I think this is really, really timely. So we've got two speakers today. The first will be speaking around sort of models of theory of change. So looking at how we can construct theory of change and some of the monitoring and evaluation that sits around that. And Jenny will speak for about 45 minutes and there'll be some interactive elements to that. She'll then be followed by Paul, who will look at some sort of examples of theory of change from the youth work sector and some of the outcome frameworks and tools that can be used around that sort of piece of work. So Paul will speak for about 30 minutes and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for sort of some questions from you. But please do feel free to post any questions you may have in the chat facility as we go through. And myself and my colleague Claire Granger from Voluntary Norfolk will do our best to keep an eye on those so that we can coordinate the questions at the end. And just a couple of points on housekeeping. If you'd like to turn your cameras on and you've got sufficient bandwidth, that would be great because it's nice to see who else is on the call. But please do be aware that the session is being recorded. So if you prefer not to be recorded, please do keep your camera off. And also when you're not speaking, please do keep yourself on mute. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to hand across to Jenny.
Thank you very much. So hopefully you can see my screen at this point, introducing me. And thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar today. I'm a consultant at NCVO. I specialise in strategy, but strategy has lots to do with monitoring and evaluation. There's a very big crossover there. So together with my team, I do also support organisations with that. I work for the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, and we're the biggest sector support body in England for the voluntary sector, which is mainly charities, but it includes other organisations as well. And we have lots of different ways that people can interact with us. We have lots of resources online. We obviously do consultancy and training. And for our members, and there's a broad spectrum of options to join as a member. We have different rates for different sizes of organisations. There are discounts on things like training and additional resources that you can access. But as well as all that frontline support, we do a lot of influencing as well on behalf of the sector. So earlier this year, we were very much at the forefront of leading the campaign to government to get financial support for charities. Anyway, let's, without further ado, let's move on. So what are we doing in this session? Well, I'm very much hoping by the end of this session, short though it is, it's a bit bish bash bosh, that you'll be able to articulate a little bit more clearly your organisational purpose and the difference that you make. And also to have an improved understanding of how to measure that difference. So the key ingredients of the webinar will be an introduction to theory of change, some work around monitoring and evaluation, and also some tools for data collection. And as was mentioned earlier, it's going to be a little bit interactive. So I just politely request that if you can't be on camera for whatever reason, if you have to step away, if you just let us know in the chat or wherever, that way when we send people off into breakout rooms, if you're not actually there, it can be a little bit disconcerting for the person that's paired for you, but we'll just know not to put you in a breakout room if you let us know that. So the first thing I'm going to do is think about theory of change. At NCVO, we frequently use this as a tool to support our consultancy clients and in our training, helping them understand and develop their strategic priorities and also monitoring and evaluation frameworks. We help it find organisations become clearer, not just on what they're doing, but also why they are doing it. And we like this cartoon. This cartoon illustrates the purpose of theory of change very nicely. So here it's expressed as the miracle that occurs between two sections of whatever these scientists or mathematicians are doing. We tend to call it the missing middle. And we find that with charities, they're extremely good at talking about that real big picture about what's wrong in the world, what needs to be fixed, and what's that big picture change that needs to happen. And they're also really good at talking about the services they deliver, what they actually do for people, or maybe in terms of campaigning, maybe wider society activities that they undertake. But what they're not so good at explaining is how what they do makes a difference that leads to that big overall change that they're working towards. So a theory of change is not just about explaining what you do as an organisation, but how what you do makes a difference to people or society. And that's really important because charities exist to make a difference in the world. So what are the ingredients of a theory of change? Well, there are 4 really key ingredients. And on the right there, impact is one very important ingredient. And that's that big long-term change I was just referring to. It is very big and long-term and complex. And therefore, really, it's something that charities work towards. But normally there's other people working towards that too. So it's very complex. For example, if you're trying to improve people's health, it's not just you as a charity that does that. There's lots of NHS organisations doing that too. And there's also lots of factors, you know, people's occupation, their lifestyles, and even their genetics, all kinds of stuff. But you contribute to that really big long-term picture, even though it's quite complex and you're only a part of it. And then there are outcomes, and this is talking about the difference that you make in the world. So the outcomes are the real world changes that result from the activities that you deliver. And these can be short, medium, or long term. So they're talking about the journey of change, the step changes that lead to that bigger picture of change. And then there are activities, or some of you may know them as outputs. So those are the things that you actually do as an organisation. Very often they're frontline services, but they could be products. And of course, there are organisations dedicated to or involved in things like advocacy and influencing and campaigning. And then when you do a full theory of change, you would also think about the assumptions under your theory. So this is really interrogating what are the enablers and risks around your theory. What do you need for success for your theory to work and for you to actually be able to make that difference in the world that you want to? So a theory of change is a description of why a particular way of working will be effective, and it shows how change happens in the short, medium and long term, and how it leads to the achievement of the intended impact. So here's a theory of change map. And you can see at the top here, here's the impact statement. This is an organisation that works with young people not in employment, education and training. And you can see at the bottom in the purple splodges, those are the things the organisation actually does. And then you can see working up from there at the bottom, improving basic skills through improved experience of work, more appropriate behaviour, greater confidence, increased knowledge of the job market. These are the step changes that those young people go through until that long-term change for them where they become more work ready. And you can see, looking at that bigger impact, that that's something that realistically this organisation could only contribute to because there are lots of other factors, for example, the local job market. And so you can see on a full theory of change how all these different things are connected, and you can see that journey of change for people. And one thing I want you to notice, which is really important, is the kind of language in the yellow boxes. It's change language. So you can see here, young people have improved basic skills. They have improved experience of work. They have greater confidence or increased knowledge or more appropriate behaviour. So that language explains the difference that is happening. There's another word, maintain, which doesn't sound like change language, but actually it's a really important outcome for people. For example, older people or people with disabilities, maintaining independence or maintaining health can be incredibly important. But generally speaking, change language is about using words like fewer or more or less or reducing or increasing. So why do we use theory of change? Well, it's a great way to actually articulate and share the story and purpose of your work. Internally, so everyone in your organisation is aligned, but also externally to your important stakeholders, even funders. And then it's a way sometimes of deciding what you will focus on in the future. When you look at all the work you're doing and the kind of difference you're trying to make, you might decide to stop some activities and start doing new ones. It's really important for evaluation because once you've articulated that difference, you can work out how to evaluate it. And then when you're evaluating, you can work out how to improve existing interventions. So I want to spend a few minutes giving everyone a chance to do a quick version of a theory of change. We'll call this quick talk. So I'm going to ask you now to write a statement. And this well, I guess the first statement is actually two statements, to be perfectly honest. So one of the statements is going to describe what you do, and the other one will describe who you work with. So one is effectively describing your activities as an organisation, and the other one, your target group. So I just want you now to think about who your target group is, and if you're working with lots of target groups, maybe choose one associated with a particular project. And then what activities are these services or products that you deliver for or with them? And just on a piece of paper or in Word on your computer, I just want you to create these two statements, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that now. Okay, let's move on now. So the next statement. So statement 2 is about that really big societal change that you're working towards. It's that broad, longer term change that you contribute to that isn't necessarily only about what your charity does. And this is very similar to your mission statement. So what is the big change that you're trying to work towards? And this could be about ending poverty, about ending abuse, stopping homelessness, something you don't do by yourself, but it's your big picture. So I'm going to ask you to create the next statement. So we are working with who, your target group you've just identified, to pursue a world where, or maybe it's a Norfolk where, and then your big picture statement. Off you go. Okay, so now we're going to move on to what for most people is the trickiest kind of statement. And this is about your missing middle. So this is about the changes you are hoping to make in that target group you have written down. These are your key outcomes. So now I want you to think, what are the key changes required for your target group? The big steps that will make them, that will enable you to work towards that impact. So it's important to note this statement is not about you and your operations. So in this statement, you're not writing at all about your activities or about your staff or your marketing, anything like that. It's all about the difference that you are making either to society or, if you're doing delivery work, to people, your beneficiaries. And those statements need to be in change language, using words like improve and increase, more or fewer, or to maintain. And because this is a little bit tricky, I'm going to give you a little bit longer to do this. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. So come up with those few really key changes, but make sure they're in change language. And then you can just pop them in a statement like this. So you've already got most of your statement about your working with who to pursue a world where, but now you're going to put your key outcomes, these change statements, and then pop your outputs or the activities you're delivering at the end. So off you go.
Jenny, we've had in the chat somebody ask if you could give an example, please, if that's okay.
Well, like earlier on, we talked about young people having increased confidence and having more knowledge about the job market. So these are the kind of differences that that charity is making through its work, through its mentoring support, through delivering basic skills training. It's increasing the basic skills which young people have. And this is tricky, and that's why we're going to pop you into some breakout groups in a moment. And then you can share your work with other people and look at your change language. But the missing middle is hard. So if you're struggling a bit, don't feel it's you. It's actually perfectly normal. Yeah, I'll just pop the starting instructions up just in case that helps you. So reminding you, it's not about your services or about the other things that you do internally, like your marketing, but it's about the change language and the difference that you are making to your beneficiaries, or if you're campaigning, it would be more to society more generally. So now you should have a statement that looks a little bit like this. If it's not perfect, don't worry, but it should look like we are working with your target group to pursue a world where the big impact statement by your outcomes, those differences you're making through the activities that you do, your outputs. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop you into breakout rooms for 6 minutes, just in pairs. And what I want you to do is to read your statement to the other person, and then they are going to help you think about your change language, your outcomes, and think about your statement in general. I popped some questions here on the next slide, which I'll leave up for you. So it's basically asking, is your statement clear? And are the outcomes realistic and expressed in change language? So we're going to send you away now in pairs to do that. Read your statements and just think about that change language and whether the statements are clear. Is everyone back? I can't. Oh yeah, okay. I think everyone's back now, aren't they? Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm loving something Claire Maynard put in the chat. Jenny, I need a weekly motivation session just like this. Bless you, Claire. How did people find that? Did some people find it really helpful? Did anyone spot some great outcomes language in the statements that other people made?
Absolutely, Jenny. It was really useful. I was teamed up with two of my voluntary Norfolk colleagues, and this is a piece of work that we are keen to take forward. So it's been really, really helpful. We all had quite different, not hugely different, but slightly different statements, but certainly a lot of commonality. So really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, actually. You should never just go off and do this in a corner. You know, you should really get people involved with it, and your service users as well, you know, sort of thinking about what is the difference that you make. Brilliant. Any other comments from other people? Things they'd like to share quickly? Do remember you're on mute, everyone, or nearly everyone.
Hi, Jean Rochford here. I just wanted to say that I met up with a young lad. I can't remember his name, so I do apologise. But because we don't know one another, it was really, you listened, and I couldn't see anything wrong with what he said. It would have been better if there'd have been somebody else who's probably a bit more forward in this to actually say, well, you could have said this or you could have said that. But I think we were both in the same boat, so we just did our own thing. But obviously you did give me that opportunity to think about words.
Great. Okay then. Well, I'm glad it's been an interesting exercise. This is really a taster, a quick bish bash bosh with it. It's we spend days doing consultancy work with people, you know, helping them work out what their theory of change is and then monitoring the evaluation frameworks for their organisation. So let me just move on. There's a few other things I'd like to share with you. So we talked about theory of change, and this is a great tool for thinking about and articulating purpose and building for a monitoring and evaluation framework. But even if you don't have a theory of change, it's still important to start identifying your outcomes and articulating that difference that you're making so that you can plan to measure it. So it's great if you have a theory of change, but it's not compulsory. And I know Paul's going to talk to you a little bit more about theory of change and how you can implement that later. So anyway, I want to move on now to think a little bit about monitoring and evaluation for the last few minutes, and then a quick whiz through tools. So monitoring can be defined as the routine and systematic collection of information for the purpose of checking that your project or your organisation is making progress towards your plans, or in this case, your theory of change, the difference that you want to make. So this information can be about the services you provide, the people you work with, and what changes as a result. An evaluation whereas it's a reflective process. So it's not about the collecting, it's about what you do with that information. And it involves using that data that you've collected. You need to use it and not just do the monitoring, which is sometimes what we find organisations do. And key to good evaluation is prioritising what you're measuring. So a small amount of data is much better than lots of data that you don't actually use. And this is important to learn. The focus of evaluation is best when it's focused on learning, not just trying to prove that you did something at the end of a project. So if we look at the learning cycle here, the first place we start is identifying the needs and issues. And this is best done through doing some kinds of needs analysis. And then going into the cycle proper, we think about the difference we want to make. And we've just done that, haven't we? We thought about impact and those step changes. And we also thought about in the last exercise, what is that? What are those activities that we want to do to make that difference? But then you have to think about how you actually track your progress. And once you've done that tracking and gathered that data, you can look at what you've learned and therefore what you do differently next time. So really, this cycle is about a cycle of continuous improvement. It's about learning. And if you think of evaluation like that, then you'll get the most benefit for your effort. And because you can monitor throughout your project or throughout the work of your organisation, please don't think of evaluation as just something you do right at the end of the project, because that learning can be continuous. So what can you monitor and evaluate? Well, you can monitor lots of stuff across your organisation. If we look here, the inputs or the resources and processes, the enabling things, you can monitor those and evaluate those. You can obviously, and charities are often very good at this, monitor and evaluate your outputs. So these are your activities, the things that you deliver. It's really important though, because this is why you exist, to monitor the difference you're making, your outcomes. Are you actually achieving those, or are you just assuming that you're achieving those? And this is where charities struggle a little bit. And then you can, in theory, evaluate your impact, but actually because it's so complex, you know what, unless you've got loads and loads of data collection capacity and probably a university, most organizations are not able to prove that they have contributed, you know, to this really big picture. So it's much better to focus on those shorter and medium term, and if you can, those long-term outcomes. You need to prioritize what you're measuring. So think about what outcomes are most important to your service users. What outcomes do you most value as an organisation? And what outcomes are most important to your funders or maybe other key stakeholders? So really do think about and prioritising, about measuring a smaller amount of stuff rather than collecting lots and lots of data that you don't manage to use effectively. And there are two kinds of data that you can use to know if you are actually effectively making progress with your organisation, to learn and also to create accountability internally and also externally to your funders and stakeholders. So quantitative information. So this is about numbers usually, about numbers of things that have happened or percentages. So about the prevalence of your outcomes or views or experiences. And most charities do quite a lot of data collection around that. And then there's the qualitative stuff. So this is narrative. It's about really describing that journey of change. So having in-depth data about exploring what's actually happened, the how and the why of that can also be really valuable to you, and not just talking about numbers of people that have come or percentages of change. So here's an example of quantitative data. 85% of parents felt more able to cope with looking after their children as a result of attending parenting support groups. And here's an example of qualitative data. So parents said this was because they felt more confident about dealing with situations they hadn't faced before. That's because they heard about the experience of others at the groups. Parents who didn't feel more able to cope had felt overwhelmed by the range of issues discussed at the groups. So this is telling you the story behind that data rather than presenting cold data. And you can see here perhaps there are other outcomes, you know, more confidence in dealing with situations and more support from other parents, more knowledge about how to cope with those situations. So please do think about collecting both types of data. So when you collect data, you need to think about the measurement, about what are those indicators of change. So we spoke, didn't we, about outcomes and how outcomes use change language. But then when we think about the kind of information that would show us whether those outcomes have been achieved, we need to think about the language of measurement here. So the top three outcomes on these examples relate to service delivery. In this particular case, it was a mental health project for older people. So we wanted them to increase knowledge of mental health services, have increased confidence to access those services, and to actually increase their access of those services. And if you look at the kind of indicators, you can see the measurement language there, whether they knew where to go, the types of services they knew about, the level of confidence, the likelihood of accessing them, and then some numbers as well, number of older people accessing mental health services, and again, the type of services they access. But if you're doing campaigning or advocacy or influencing work, you might have different kinds of indicators. So whether something has been read or not, briefing papers in this case, but a lot of organisations use social media. So you might be looking at click-throughs on particular articles and whether they're cited later on in someone else's information. So other things like attendance at campaign meetings or whether or not people want to stay in contact with you about your campaign. So we've thought about the difference that you want to make and articulating that, And then we thought about the different kinds of data that you would use to collect evidence that that difference is happening. So I just briefly want to talk about the kind of tools that you might use. And there are lots of tools out there, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. So these are the kind of things you should think about when trying to decide what tool to use to collect your data. Cost may be one. Lots of people are interested in using things like Outcome Star and tools that they can buy into, but they're not always the most cost-effective thing for your organisation, especially if you're a small organisation. And often what you can do is look at those tools and use the principles of them, but tailor them to your organisation's needs and find a way of doing that yourself. You need to look at the type of data you're collecting. So are you trying to collect quantitative or qualitative data? Because that will affect the kind of tools that you're using. The skills required. What skills do you have in your organisation to do this kind of data collection? Do you need to upskill people? And what can you do with the skills that you already have? The time involved. If you buy into lots of tools and techniques, it can be quite time consuming. What's good enough, and what can you do simply and effectively for your organisation? Your monitoring and evaluation has to be proportionate to the level of resource that you have. And then the level of participation. Your monitoring and evaluation will involve your service users. So what's most appropriate for them? What kind of tools can they engage with so you can get a good level of participation? And again, this relates to the kind of accessibility your tools have. So that's for your participants, but also, as we said earlier, for the skill level of your staff. So really common tools include things like questionnaires, interviews and focus groups, but all of these have their pros and cons. It's very easy to use questionnaires, but these can get a little bit repetitive. Also, it's difficult for some kinds of service users to complete them because of their level of skill or English or just their age. They're great if you want to collect different kinds of data. You can get good numerical data out of it, but also you can use some text boxes as well to get some of that qualitative data too. They provide good confidentiality so people can give anonymous feedback. Interviews are another way of getting data from people that you're working with. And confidentiality is possible there if people have trust in you. But it gives you an opportunity on the plus side to have a more open conversation than a survey would necessarily give you. You don't have to stick rigidly to the questions, so you can do something a little bit more exploratory. But it's quite time consuming to do a range of interviews and to actually do the processing of the information after. Focus groups are another way to get feedback. And you can have some really great conversations here. When you have more than one person in the room, it can really spark ideas and get lots of different kind of feedback and ideas going. But then for some service users or topics that may not be right because there will be issues of confidentiality. So you may not hear the things that perhaps you would like to hear from your monitoring and evaluation. All these kinds of tools need time developed for processing the data so that actually you can evaluate at the end. So you need to think about that. And that's especially true for very open-ended questionnaires and for interviews and focus groups. So to get round the monotony, or just because you want to do something different from using surveys, there are participatory tools that you can use as well. So here are some typical ones. Voting, and this can be done in different ways. One of the things we sometimes do at our training is we put a kind of bullseye, if you like, a dartboard of how people are feeling about theory of change as they come into the room. And they just put a sticky dot on how they would rate their theory of, or how they feel about theory of change. And then we ask them to put another sticky dot on before they leave the room. And that's interesting because sometimes people feel less confident when they go out. And it's just that thing that because people have more knowledge, they realise the more they don't know. And that's just part of learning. You can also do things like something physical in the room. You know, this is a great thing to do with children, with young people. You can ask them to stand in a particular part of the room if they feel a certain way about something, or if they feel their knowledge has improved, or another part of the room for the opposite opinion or experience. Diaries are a great way of collecting information. Participants can do this themselves, or you can actually do it as an organisation, doing observations on what's happened. You can use very creative methods like collaging or getting people to take photos, but these are often best used as a starting point for an evaluation conversation rather than evaluating themselves. Role plays and vignettes or short case studies are a great way to talk about difficult issues in a way that focuses on the issues but not the people. So for very sensitive things like bullying, that's sometimes a very good approach. And then there's mapping, which could be geographical mapping or other kinds of things like body mapping, you know, asking people to represent on their body how they feel about a particular issue. And then choosing and sorting games are great for young people, or again with difficult issues. So you can write a load of statements on sorting cards and get people to choose the ones that they relate to most in that moment. And then I'm running out of time. Oh, just the last slide now. So just try and implement some good principles of data collection. Think about what's the best timing to collect your data. You don't have to do it constantly. So think about what are those key points for you and for your participants. Think about doing samples. Don't have to necessarily get information from everyone, but you can either take a sample at a particular time or take samples across groups. Do pilot. Don't create a massive monitoring and evaluation framework and system and then find out it doesn't particularly work very well for you. Pilot your monitoring and evaluation and learn that as a way of improving what you do in the future. Get your users involved in designing your tools and getting feedback, and give training and support to your staff. And I need to hand over to Paul now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I'm going to go over some similar stuff. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. But I'm going to come with some case studies, really, some examples of theories of change that have worked for us as an organisation in the past. So yeah, my name's Paul. I'm the head of youth work at MAP. Most of you will have come across MAP in the past, but we're a counselling, youth work and advice service for young people aged 11 to 25. So we have gone on a bit of an impact journey over the last 4 years where we've been always trying to rethink ways of demonstrating our impact and also learning along the way, really. So that's just something I'd kind of echo what Jenny's been saying, really, is you can learn a lot from impact and evaluation to improve your services to young people rather than just it being about proving your impact. So sometimes organisations, they want that quick win of, you know, let's demonstrate the impact because we know what we do works and we know it's great, but you kind of have to ask yourself some more deeper questions and kind of question yourself before you get to that point. Is what you do as good as it could be? Do you involve young people or your service users as much as possible? Do you involve your staff team? And does everyone always know what you're trying to achieve as a joint mission? Similar to what Jenny and said, you know, people might actually have a differing expectation or understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve as a project or organisation. And therefore, it's really important to explore that. And a theory of change is a really brilliant way of doing that, to kind of bring teams together and explore your why, really, and why are you there for young people and what are you actually trying to achieve as an organisation, really. So that's a good opportunity to involve. I would really encourage to involve frontline staff, and some of the examples I'll bring up are where we've involved frontline staff and they have a better understanding of what they're trying to achieve and do their job better effectively as a result. So I would really encourage that it doesn't kind of sit with senior managers, it doesn't sit high up or it goes into a funding bid and then just never actually lives and breathes. Your theory of change should definitely be something that is a living, breathing thing, and that you should evolve and adapt it as you go along. Because again, projects and work changes throughout time as well. So you may want to tweak your theory of change. There might be external factors that change things that mean you have to adapt along the way. we've seen that in the last 8 to 9 months. You know, some of our theories of change internally have definitely changed as a result of COVID-19. So, you know, making them live and adaptable is really, really important. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and hopefully this will work. I think I just need to be added as a host because I left the meeting and came back. It's just saying host disabled, screen sharing.
Yes, I've just updated it, Paul.
Oh, wonderful, it's working now. Right, where are we going? Here we go. So hopefully you can see that. So the first one, I'm just gonna take you through a few different examples. They're quite different. Apologies that they do all involve young people, but a lot of what is in the examples of theories of change is really, really transferable, but also you can see how creative they can be as well in terms of you know, how you can make them look differently. They're not set in stone. You can make them quite creative and quite you know, interactive for staff and young people. So this first one is an example of a project called Boost, which is a project that was really about kind of reducing, improving the social and emotional well-being of students in a school. So we looked at, and again, your theory of change can start with them really key principles around activities, outcomes, and impact, but you can take it where you want because it's your theory of change and you can change things depending on how you want to do them, really. So for this one, you know, they looked at really looking at quantitative measures and qualitative measures around the ways they were going to kind of get the feedback, but the overall aim was to improve the social and emotional well-being of students, resulting in their improved abilities to engage productivity and appropriately with their peers and their education. And again, a really good part of a theory of change is when you take this, you know, we took this theory of change to a school, and it just really articulates what you're trying to achieve to your key stakeholders, but also it's something that they can understand. So it kind of saves you having to do an elevator pitch where you try to cram everything into one go. You can really sum up what you're doing. It just looks really professional and kind of articulate as well. So as you can see, the outcomes are in there as well, which is increased confidence, stabilised school environment, increased social and emotional well-being. Again, these are all things that the school really wanted us to achieve, but kind of articulating them and putting them on paper, and for our staff to be aware of what they were trying to achieve and what common goals we had was really, really effective. And then you could also add things like mechanisms of change. So it's more the how are you going to do it, the way you act, the things you're going to introduce, maybe resources as well. So try new activities with supportive peer adults, one-to-one and group work, the principle of involving and planning and decision-making, learning from experience, and so on. So mechanisms of change is also quite a good thing to do. We have like a set of MAP values, and they always go into our mechanisms of change, because things like being young person centered or being, you know, working for social justice, they're all kind of habits that we have within the organisation that go into our mechanisms of change. So I'm going to bring up a different one. So this is for counselling. Again, each of the theories of change you'll see are really different in how they look. So again, it just kind of demonstrates how creative you can get with them. So this is one that our counselling team came up with in terms of, you know, their theories of change. And again, you can see, yeah, it's really, the ultimate aim is to develop and improve relationship with self and others and sense of own agency in the world. So that's the overall ultimate aim and impact. You look at the outcomes, which is self-care, motivation, empowerment, improved emotional resilience and well-being, self-acceptance, integrated self, things like increased self-esteem, emotional literacy, open to life experience, ability to change, and then things about increased self-awareness, relationships to mechanisms of change. Some of the things that the councillors were going to do was signposting. So they've made this really creative and made it really kind of fit their service. And then things around, again, measurement. So they felt that was really important to put in there around Warwick and Edinburgh mental health, wellbeing scale, chief feedback forms, stats that they could get, and again looking at quality as well, so observation of feedback, verbal and written feedback from young people. So there are a couple of local examples. That was our counselling theory of change for our point 1 service, and then, as I said, that one's for a project that was based in CNS. Also as well, I'm just going to share, this was a national one that we were involved with, which was the Youth Investment Fund. So this was a nationwide project. So the impact was fewer young people depending on benefits, fewer young people in the criminal justice system, more young people engaged in education and training, more young people participating in community development, improved cross-section partnership and sustainable service provision. And then we look at kind of the specific outcomes for the project, or in the level below, and then the activity. So this one sticks a little bit more to the format that Jenny was talking about earlier. So looking at the activities, things like building partnerships, improving our profile, supporting the local youth work providers to measure their impact, young people involved in the planning, promotion and participation of our open access youth work. So this one sticks a little bit tighter to the kind of format, and then looks at some assumptions as well of do we know what we know, kind of a epistemology format of just putting out there some assumptions that we're aware of. So again, all of them theories of change were really, really different. And this one is one of my favourite ones because it was one that was a group of young people on a campaign to get a skate park in Watton. So there wasn't a skate park. They were the only market town in Watton that didn't have a skate park in Breckland. So they went to their local district council or parish council and said, we've got a vision for Watton Skate Park and what it could look like. We know you've got the budget to do it. They even got some key stakeholders like the head teacher on board, the local police, to kind of come to them to a local council meeting. It was a really good bit of kind of activism and change making. And they did a theory of change. Again, it gave them so much credibility at the parish council meeting. The parish council were kind of flabbergasted by how articulate the young people were and how much thought they put in, just because they had this theory of change to hand out to every single member on the parish council. So they looked at the impacts, that young people have a safe space and a sense of belonging in their local community. They looked at the reduction of antisocial behaviour in the Watton community. So again, things that the parish council would definitely want to achieve. A quote from a young person and the Breckland Youth Advisory Board. The outcomes and benefits from a new skate park in Watton. So looking at physical health, mental health, improved confidence, community cohesion, more young people taking part in physical activity, improved relationships, co-production, reduction in the number of young people congregating in the town centre, increased involvement of young people in democracy and decision making, and increased safety of young people in Watton. Again, all things that the parish council were really looking for. But again, this really, some of the young people were quite anxious and nervous going into the meeting as well. So this kind of gave them a really good kind of script and backbone of their argument to be able to speak to people in the meeting. And then kind of how they're going to make it happen. So this is kind of the activities part, or the kind of mechanisms of change as well. So shared vision, everyone working together, continued involvement of young people, support and commitment from everyone, commitment and willingness to compromise and listen from all, community buy-in, and some resources that they need as well. So steering group, people's time and energy, funding from the council, the timeline, skate park plan and design, and consultation with young people and residents. So that's my favourite one because it was just a really grassroots theory of change that really made a difference and had a really positive outcome, because after the meeting, young people were able to get the skate park commissioned and signed off. So the skate park's now, I think it's hopefully being built. Last time I heard it was, but obviously with the pandemic, things have slowed down on a number of levels, but that was a really, really good example. So there's a few examples of theories of change, and I'm happy to send them around. I've also got a blank template that you can use, which is similar to the skate park one. It's a really simple one that you can use with your teams, either print it off and do it if you are able to be face-to-face, or put it up on a big screen, or you can do it kind of in an online meeting together, doing it digitally by kind of screen sharing. So I'll send around the completed ones just so you've got some good examples, and I'll send around a blank template as well. So yeah, I've just got a few minutes left. So I'm just going to pull up something around outcomes. So some of this is looking at what, so finding the right tool for the right job. And by doing that, you know exactly what you're trying to measure as well. That's really, really important. So some tools will not measure what you're actually trying to achieve, and therefore they're not the right tools for the right job. Someone said, you know, you wouldn't use a spoon to kind of open a bottle of wine, you'd use a corkscrew. So it's like getting the right tool for the right outcome and job that you're trying to achieve. So the Centre for Youth Impact, and again, this applies primarily to young people, but there's lots of frameworks out there where you can test what you're actually trying to achieve and measure. So these are this is something created by the Young Foundation in 2012, and it's the kind of soft outcomes that we often feel get missed, or that you know, funders might not take into account, that are really, really important to the development of people and young people as well. So things like communication, confidence and agency, planning and problem solving, relationships and leadership, creativity, resilience and determination, and managing feelings. So, you know, when we're thinking about some of our youth work projects, we think about these capabilities that young people need to kind of succeed in life. And if they have these, we know that they have much better life chances, better chances of staying in mainstream education, and also have a better opportunity to have better mental health and better outcomes long term in terms of jobs and prosperity, really. So so these are kind of just good things to measure. And then there are, which I'll also send this round, just trying to get out of this. But the things that's a really useful tool is a matrix that can measure these capabilities, and then you can figure out which tool is best for you. So there's a list of all these different tools, and then it will tell you in the other spreadsheet that I'll send around which capabilities that I've just demonstrated, which ones it actually measures. So if you're trying to measure all 7, because they're all the outcomes you're working towards in a project, it'll tell you whether it'll do it and whether it'll do it well. The other thing that this spreadsheet does is it tells you who made it and who owns it, a summary of what the tool actually does, the website you can find more information on, which context it works in and which age ranges it's kind of designed for, its flexibility in terms of how broadly you can use it, what evaluation method is used to do it. So you'll figure out how much work you actually have to put in. Some tools you have to put in more work than you actually do face-to-face work with young people. So that's always a kind of balancing act, and you've got to do an evaluation on how much time it's going to take. Important is always whether it's validated. So a lot of people will think that some tools are validated, but a lot aren't. So for example, Outcome Star is not a validated tool, but it's a really, really popular one because it measures a lot of really good stuff. And you know, it's very popular and commonly used in local authorities and other settings as well, but it's not actually a validated tool. So, but a lot of people presume that it is. So it's always worth to know whether a tool is validated or not. How much is it going to cost? You know, is there an expense required? Is it free? Do you have to buy a license? Is it an annual license, etc.? That always comes into it as well. The method of data collection, the cost involved, time commitment is always a really big factor to factor in. Are you going to have to employ someone to kind of make this tool happen, like an impact and outcomes officer, or is it is it something that can be done by your frontline staff? And the reach as well. So is it a small sample? Is it a big sample? Can you use it with everyone? And who's it being used by as well? How many organisations? Is it used by more than 100 organisations? Just a few? Is it only just getting off the ground? That kind of thing as well. So that's a really good matrix of tools. And again, there's another spreadsheet which I'm not showing you but we'll send round, which shows which one of these measures what in terms of M7 capabilities. Again, apologies, that's just relating to young people, but it might be useful for some of you as well, because some of the tools are multiple age ranges, or you can just use it with anyone really. So I'm going to stop sharing now because I'm just going to wrap up. The other thing I would say is that so that was just a really brief overview of some examples of theories of change, but also measurement tools and matrix of tools. What we do offer at MAP is we're the East of England regional impact lead for the Centre for Youth Impact. So they're a national organisation that are trying to basically influence and support the voluntary sector and the youth sector with their impact. So we do an Eastern role for them, and we do offer free training and consultation work for organisations around their impact. So we've delivered theory of change training before, and we've delivered, which is half a day, and we've delivered outcomes training as well. So we're going to be doing some theory of change training in January. So I'll send around the dates for that, and any of you are more than welcome to sign up for that, even if you don't work with young people. Because of this link, I'm more than happy for people to attend because a lot of the information is transferable. Also as well, we offer a kind of networking sessions around this as well. So we've got a session coming up in January as well about what does good online youth work look like. So we're going to do a bit of an exploration, a bit of a deep dive into the world of online youth work and what does the quality of that look like, and how can you measure your impact when you're working online. So they're kind of two opportunities that are coming up, and I'll send the dates around for them via email after the meeting as well. And just good opportunity to kind of share ideas, meet like-minded people, and who are maybe already doing work on impact really. So that's me wrapping up. I think yeah, the idea was to finish at around 1:45, so I'm a little bit early. But yeah, just that's the last two things really. Is the training. I'll send the dates around if anyone wants to do it. That'd be great. The networking and the what does good online youth work look like. They're kind of some forums that you can get involved with in the new year. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll pass back to Lucy now.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. That's incredibly informative, and a huge sort of amount of resources there, I think, for people to sort of look into. So thank you very much. And thank you, Jenny. I thought your session was very, very clear for quite a complex subject. So it's certainly really helpful for me. So we've got about 15 minutes now. So I'd like to invite any questions really from anybody here today. I'm aware we did have a question earlier on during Jenny's session. Jenny, did you want to respond to that one? It was from...
I saw there was one about asking information about outcomes. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things on the theory of change, and just say I really love the theories of change that Paul presented. Mm-hmm. And I sort of presented, you know, those key ingredients, but I really love it when I see things like guiding principles on a theory of change. And I really like the way that the assumptions was on one of them as well. So I think that's really, really good practice if you can do that. And one thing I saw, which I really liked as well, was there is an accountability line. And I don't think Paul mentioned that, but it's really important to realise what you can realistically measure. And it's kind of something that I find a lot of organisations get very anxious about. You know, they lose contact with young people, or, you know, they realise that these really long-term outcomes, which they think they're working towards, you know, they can't prove them, and they get very anxious about it. But I think this is where your theory of change can really help you, because if you can measure those steps that you're, you know, are closer to the work that you do, then it creates that argument for you and for funders, you know, to say that you really are making that difference. But if you can't measure it, if it's too far away from you, if it's too complicated, just be honest about that. And it's absolutely fine to have that accountability line and say, we can measure this stuff, but you know what, actually, we kind of know, or we think this happens, but it's not in our capabilities for us.
Lovely. I think you may have touched a little bit on Claire's question, actually.
Okay.
Claire, did you want to share your question from earlier on?
Oh, hang on. I shall go up and see if I can see it. So yeah, my struggle. So I found the session really useful in terms of quickly mapping out some of that kind of theory of change and that key messaging. But my struggles is to map the impact when a lot of the outcomes aren't tangible. So we might not see people doing the activity that we're asking, or in my situation in terms of St John, the community impact of confidence. And obviously we don't want first aid incidences to happen in the first place. So it's difficult to say, you know, when something happens and you respond to that, could you let us know? That's not really, I don't think anyone's ever done that. So it's really difficult to kind of put a measure on that. And I've done quite a lot of pre and post surveys in terms of, we used to be funded by DCMS and Nesta, so doing pre and post surveys in terms of confidence and competence. But it's that long-term measure that, or longer term measure, that I'd be interested in how we can sort of quantify some of that work, especially where I'm going in terms of hard to reach communities, ESOL, BAME, that sort of thing, is really understanding the value added, so that we can make sense of that theory of change. And I'm hoping that the sort of indirect outcome of that is that management and other departments support some of this work going forward, because they can see tangible outcomes.
Yeah, can I just come in there? Yeah, yeah, really common challenges there, Claire, and I think
you've got the answer, Paul. That'd be great.
I can coach a little bit. I haven't got the exact answers, but I totally agree with what you said at the end about buy-in. If you have kind of one part of a service that isn't buying into your impact and outcome measures, it can, you know, it can derail the whole thing. So again, getting leadership on board, people in management, you know, frontline young people or service users that you're working with, and your frontline staff invested is so important. And it largely does empower people rather than give them another thing to do, especially if it's quite a creative process where you almost start with a blank sheet of paper and say, well, you come up with, you know, they often take ownership. So that one of that was in a school, it was 2 youth workers that came up with that, and they really took ownership of it. In terms of the long-term impact, again, you've got to kind of find your own way, but I think it's interesting to speak to your team about different creative ways that you can kind of demonstrate that and kind of get maybe out of your comfort zone and think out of the box on how to do that. So our advice service in Norwich, they often have young people that come in crisis for emergency advice, and they'll come in just once or twice or maybe 3 times. And then we'll be like, okay, well, we might see you next week, and we never see them again. But what we try to do is, with their permission, ask, can we check in with you in 6 weeks? Can we check in with you in 12 weeks? And do some of the same outcome measures, but also get some qualitative data on their experience as well. So what we do is, we might see someone for 3 times, and then one of our administrators will call them back in 6 weeks. And we don't try and do everyone, because that's a lot of work and it's kind of impossible to do. But we try and get kind of a 10 to 20% ratio of people giving us that feedback later down the line. And then a lot of them say, yeah, actually, I came for that session. I've got that advice on my housing situation. Now I'm no longer homeless. And then you can say, okay, well, and then a bit like Jenny was saying, you can put a kind of percentage on how much of an impact you had on that outcome, really, in terms of, you can maybe say, well, maybe we were 70% contribute towards that young person not being homeless, and that was one of the outcomes we were hoping to achieve. And again, it requires the buy-in of young people and their permission, and your staff team kind of working in different ways. But that's just one example of when you kind of think differently and try and put some things in place, you can measure that long-term impact.
I think one of the biggest things, and I am the team, so doing a national CPR campaign has been interesting this year. But I think one of the most valuable things is when Jenny talked about a sample. So doing the pre and post surveys on forms has been great, because you get a nice little wheel and percentages straight away, and nothing else, you know, you need to do. Whereas I think my expectation of myself is unreasonable in terms of getting that kind of impact from everybody. So actually, you know, even if we just got, you know, 10 people to respond out of 100 to say 3 months on what they remember, would still be positive. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And not to put too much pressure on yourself, you know, 10% is still a really good sample. So
I need to remember that one. And I think the other great thing that you said, Jenny, was about evaluation. So I'm being pressed quite hard to tie up the evaluation, and my perfectionism doesn't always allow that. But it's almost like there's so much to learn, and there's so much more that comes out the week after, 2 weeks after, that just having that one report, I get it's got to happen, but it's almost like we need to be in a constant stage of evaluation and putting in those lessons and ideas. So yeah, it's certainly food for thought in terms of how we keep that on the agenda rather than seeing it as activity or event or project, evaluation, end, move on. I think a lot of organisations have got stuck in that way of thinking, and we tend to grab new stuff rather than keep that conversation. So thank you, because that's certainly empowered me to feel like I'm on the right train.
Yeah, and I think the theory of change approach, if you can get buy-in from your organisation, and then you can start asking them the questions, you know, if these are the outcomes, you know, how do you think we could get some more information about that? But on your theory of change, you know, you're in your assumptions, you can sort of be upfront that actually you don't have that much contact with people beyond, and just be upfront about your ability to evaluate. And one of the other things that you can think of is your evidence base, because maybe you can't prove what you're doing, but if other people are doing something that is very similar and you can actually draw on that evidence base, then that's fine, because that can still count for evidence for you, as long as it's like enough. I mean, you can't have something that's, sometimes people stretch that a little bit, but especially if you're a smaller organization, then it's very hard to measure that bigger picture. But if someone's already done it through some big university study or something, then you know, you can reference that.
Well, one of the original aims was affecting the outcomes of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in NHS trusts. I'm not sure that anyone's going to crack that nut anytime soon, but I think it is about sharing that responsibility. So I love that line of responsibility and where that sits. Definitely going to get the post-it notes out and use that. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah, one thing we talk about as well is like a tapestry of evidence as well. So no numbers without stories, and no stories without numbers, because both of them can complement each other really well. So when we talk about the accountability line, if you've got that good sample and you think, well, things seem to have changed for these young people in our case, we're pretty sure that was us. You know, it's really okay to ask them, you know, what do you think made this change? Or here's this change, what do you think made that? Because then if people are telling you that it was that intervention or something that you did or coming along to a group, you can then say, well, the data is saying this. And also we've got some case studies and some people giving us feedback saying it was this. Maybe there's a parent in there as well, or a head teacher, or a PCSO that tells us, yeah, what you did made a real impact. So then you can kind of have this tapestry approach where you've got multiple indicators telling you it was your intervention that made that impact. And you can be a lot more certain, and you can speak a lot more with credibility that it was you that made that difference. So that's another thing to think about, is not just looking for that kind of one silver bullet. Sometimes 3 or 4 different forms of evidence can really back up an argument you're trying to make.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions at all?
Alistair, you're on mute. I can see you talking, but you're on mute. We all do it.
It was a question building on the Watton skate park experience, but I guess it's a question both to Jenny and Paul. It's about the influence the theory of change and the associated impact assessments have on commissioners and funders who may be wishing to have submissions and formats in their own format. What kind of influence and what kind of success rate do you think, if there was a uniform, just say, is there advantage in having some form of uniform systems within Norfolk?
So a lot of funders will require it now. I think we kind of see it more and more frequent that, you know, they'll want you to come with a bit of a theory of change. So if you can get one in there, you know, anyway, with any application, that kind of just shows that you're thinking about impact as well. And it's good, again, your application will be stronger because it will be more realistic, because, you know, you hear some stories about organisations going, we're going to do this, and all the staff go, really? You know, that doesn't sound achievable, or that's not what's in my job description. So again, getting people involved, it'll be much more realistic, it'll be much more achievable if you do a theory of change from the beginning. I think, you know, hopefully the example that I send out to you, the blank example, is something that you can use, and using the rules that Jenny demonstrated today. And again, if people want to come along to the training, there's some bits that you can add on in there. But I'm more than happy for that kind of blank template to be used as a template and sent around to everyone, that again, people can play around with it, be creative. But it does have an impact with funders. You know, I think it does show that you've thought about it, number one. So that will show them that you're thinking about impact and evaluation, but also it's just really easy to demonstrate what you're trying to achieve, and it just puts it in a nice creative way. You can probably put 5 pages worth of writing and text into one theory of change, and it probably is more effective with people, really. I often find that with head teachers, you know, they're really busy, they've probably got 5 minutes in their day to look at your funding proposal. If they look at your theory of change, they're probably going to be more impressed than 5 pages of my writing. And that's not necessarily right, but that's kind of the realism that we sometimes live in. So,
and I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't tell you what weight theories of change have with local authority commissioners. It's really not my area of expertise. But interestingly, I am doing one for the NHS. NHS England and Improvement have a VCSE leadership programme to involve the voluntary sector more in the sort of healthcare systems. It's actually beyond health, it's also care. So obviously someone somewhere in the statutory sector is interested in theories of change. And I would just say, because I think as well as thinking about sort of projects and things like that, one of the things that happens with charities is that they go after funding and they end up with different funders, and then you end up with all these different monitoring and evaluation requirements. And actually a theory of change can really help you bring all that together, because what can happen is you don't end up with a very coherent organization sometimes, and that's why, you know, different staff have different views of what your organization is there for. So I think it's a really good way of actually bringing that alignment internally and really identifying what are those key changes that you should be measuring across all projects to make sure that they are contributing to your mission. And I think that's where, for me as a strategist, it can get very interesting, because when I do that with clients, they sometimes look at their theory of change and say, I don't think we should be doing that anymore, actually. You know, that's not really what we're about. So yeah, I think if you find that you're sort of getting mission creep or just got projects everywhere with all these different kinds of monitoring and evaluation, you know, requirements from funders, I think it can really help you become more cohesive about that picture of delivery.
Thank you very much.
Jenny, sorry. Jenny, I'm very interested to hear about that work with NHS England. I'm sitting here, this week it's come out that Jean and I are a tiny niche organisation. We're not even incorporated yet. But I'm also sitting on our mental health improvement board, and I'm seeing the level of monitoring, tracking data that our mental health trust has been called out by the CQC as being rated inadequate for children, families and young people. So my head is kind of full of that kind of level of data, and then us as a tiny organisation trying to do a good job, but we're tiny and we can't afford tools and all of that. But the fact that NHS England have got that, I'd like to know more details about that, if I may, please, because that really interests me that that's happening at that level as well.
Okay, I'll send a link to Tasha and she can share it with you.
Thank you.
My email will be on the deck. You're welcome to get in contact. But the idea is that VCSE leaders at system level and place level engage in this programme, and then they kind of replicate that learning and get greater involvement, you know, in other areas at place level and at neighbourhood level.
Yeah.
So I don't think you'd probably be able to, it sounds like your organisation wouldn't engage in the programme directly, but I think there's probably some systems and processes that you might want to know about. Yeah. Okay.
I've been having conversations with NHS England Improvement Board that have come into Norfolk to the Mental Health Trust at a level I'm speaking to them in my plain language and being recognised, but the difference between what I do at the grassroots level and what I'm doing sitting on that improvement board, I sometimes can't believe I'm there actually, and I don't quite understand what's going on. And actually Paul Mapp has commissioned, isn't it, to do the level tier 1, tier 2 council. And so I've been sitting up as one of your colleagues in a mapping service, and it's beyond me in some ways, but yeah, it just interests me to know what is out there and what's happening.
Okay.
That does kind of take us to 2:30, I'm afraid. So we are at the end of our session. But Tina, thank you for your question, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you offline about how we might be able to sort of support you in some of the work that you're doing. Unless there's any further reflections or comments from Paul or from Jenny, I'm going to wrap the session up with a very big thank you.
Just like to say, I know Paul's got a fantastic programme through MAP. Obviously, NCVO does lots of training and consultancy as well beyond what MAP does. We got some theory of change training coming up in the new year. We've also done loads of stuff around resources and guidance around COVID for charities. So do get on our website, and when I send out the deck, it will have some links to things for you and my email address. So if you want to get in contact.
Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. I think it's been I certainly feel like I've learned an awful lot. So thank you for sort of generosity and supporting the conference this week. And thank you everybody who's attended. And we'll get those slides and resources out to you in the coming week. And yeah, thanks very much, and good to see you all.